Welcome guys, I'm Gio here, hope you're having a great day. And this is a special video where I'm gonna be talking about my personal top 5 reasons for using Angular. Before we jump into details, I want to make a disclaimer. This is not a comparison video. I think that most of the comparison videos or content in general is very basic. Usually what I see is that author is building something like to-do list or login page or something very trivial, and I personally think that it's just useless. If you're just gonna scratch the surface and talk about very simple and obvious things, it's useless. You can just check the documentation for different tools and you don't need comparison for that. In order to make a truly useful comparison video, I think author needs to have an equally deep understanding of the tools that author is comparing. There are certain things that can be only learned from experience. You can read all the books, all the courses, all the articles and documentation, but if you don't have experience, you're just going to miss some very subtle, nuanced details. Let's say author is making comparison about React and Vue, and author has worked on React for 2 years. He understands a lot of details, a lot of nuances, and he's checked the source code and worked on different projects with different teams and all of that. And now he has a good understanding. Now author needs, I think, another 2 years to understand how Vue works, how it's internally structured, and get these all nuances, and then make the comparison video. And if you're comparing a lot of tools, it gets incredibly difficult. And I personally think that it's just not feasible to do that. I have worked with various tools and frameworks and libraries during my time with different companies and organizations, but most of my experience is with Angular. So I'm gonna offer you my personal top 5 reasons for using Angular and why I recommend to use that tool in your projects. Let's start with the first one, and obviously it is TypeScript. Why TypeScript is so important? When you're building a successful project, you have to keep in mind that it takes a lot of iteration. Let's say you create some basic product, you hand it to users, they use it, they give you feedback, then you make adjustments, you make changes, and so on. And this is like never-ending cycle. We as programmers and software engineers, we have to design our projects with change in mind. In order to accommodate the change and move faster, you need to have the right tools. And having the strong type system is absolutely necessary. It is especially true if you're working at scale. You have a large code base, a lot of developers. You need to be able to organize and structure your code base and name things and organize it so it's easier to navigate and make changes and so on. That's why TypeScript is, I think, absolutely necessary if you think of any kind of success. You may say that TypeScript can be used with all the other tools and frameworks and it's not exclusively in Angular. And that is true, but Angular just shoves this in your face when you start using it and sets you in the right direction from the beginning. Okay, I'm not even sure if you can use Angular without TypeScript at all. I've never tried that. That's why I think the number one reason I like Angular is that it is based on TypeScript. Next thing is tooling. Angular has a lot of different parts and building blocks. It has services, it has components and modules and pipes and all of the things. And to quickly navigate through that and create them and manage them, you can use Angular CLI, which is an incredible tool. Going back to my previous point, building a successful project is an iterative process and it takes a lot of time, maybe years. Not only you have to keep your code clean, but also your dependencies up to date. Angular is changing the versions, they add new updates and all of that. And Angular provides a very, very nice tool for moving between the versions. It's going to make code changes, it's going to migrate most of the things automatically, so manual part in update is very small. And this is another thing that is very useful when you're working on a long-term project that you care to succeed. These two are just fundamental things. I think that Having a strong type system with incredible tooling is very useful in order to succeed and make your day-to-day life easier as a developer. It doesn't matter if it's a language or framework or some tool. These two things are just foundational. That's why these two are my top picks. Next thing, of course, is RxJS. This is an incredible library in JavaScript ecosystem. And I have even created a separate series for that, and you should definitely check that. This library can be used with other libraries and frameworks, but Angular takes advantage of that and exposes observable interfaces to work with Angular. For example, you have reactive forms, you can represent HTTP requests as observables, and so on. Why is it so important? It is because UI is a very dynamic place. We have to listen to user inputs, responses from HTTP requests, from WebSockets, route changes, form changes, all of that. And RxJS allows us to model extremely complex user interactions and chain them together in a very declarative, easy to read and maintain way. Again, this is incredible library, and I'm very happy that Angular exposes observable APIs to work with. That's why this is number 3. Moving on, next is a dependency injection. This is a famous design pattern. I'm not going to talk about a lot here, but I'll try to explain it in simple Angular terms. So in Angular we have components and then we have services. Usually services contain some kind of logic inside, some code that is not necessarily related to UI, so we separate them into services. Naturally, this creates dependencies between components and services, or services and other services. Let's say we have login component, and login component depends on login service, and login service depends on HTTP service to make the request, and also on local storage service to store the token, whatever. So the thing is that we have a dependency graph, and with dependency injection we can separate managing and creating dependencies and actually consuming them. So we can say in Angular that we need user service in user component, and Angular will take care of creating the instance of user service and passing it down to our component. This is just a simple explanation of how dependency injection works in Angular, but of course there is a lot more to it. I might even create a separate video for that. This feature is especially useful in large-scale apps when we have to write the tests and have unit tests for different components. And if you worked with UI, you know how annoying writing unit tests can be, and especially for components. With dependency injection, what we can do is that we can create our own dependency injection container during testing and test component with different scenarios. We can isolate different services and inject mock services that behave according to our tests, and this is just super useful in that case as well. So that's why it has the 4th place in the list. And the final one, at least for this video, is reactive forms. Dealing with forms in UI is the most annoying and boring thing you can imagine. What do I mean by dealing with forms? You have to add the validation, you have to look different flags, you have to display warning messages, you have to track value changes, you have to reset all of that back, and etc. And it is really basic, really boring thing that you can do with UI. But Angular provides a really solid platform that allows us developers to deal with forms in a less painful, less boring way. So basically what you have is a very declarative way of describing your forms, and then very simple way to bind it to UI. And reactive forms expose observable API, meaning you can take advantage of RxJS operators and do all sorts of manipulations with value changes and so on. Before I end up this video, I want to make a general note about the Angular. It is really a platform. It provides all the basic tools that you need to build your app, and it allows you to focus on your project and on your problems instead of dealing with very annoying, boring parts of the app, like dealing with forms or making requests or creating components manually and so on. I've personally used Angular in many different projects, and I've got really satisfying results. I have worked on successful products that use Angular, and I think it's a really incredible tool if you know how to use it properly. And yeah, I'm gonna leave you with that, and I'm interested in what you think. Do you use Angular? If so, what are your reasons for using it? If you are using the other framework or library, I'm really interested in what you think, why you think that using this particular framework or library is beneficial to you. And yeah, just add the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed it. Click the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends.